Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of The Magnetic Woman Show. I'm your host, Lauren Joyce, top sex, love, and relationship expert and founder of The Magnetic Woman. In this episode, you guessed it, we're going to be talking all about sex. And it might not be exactly in the way that you think. So let's dive in. I'm going to talk about the importance of having an incredibly healthy relationship to your own sexuality or sexual essence. So while we all want mind-blowing sex, earth-shattering orgasms, soul-shaking intimacy, for so many women, that is very far from the reality. So in this episode, I'm going to talk about how to really close that gap. And before you get too excited that I'm just going to give you a list of positions to give you the sex life that you've always wanted and desired, that is not going to happen on this episode. This episode is actually about what's underneath the best position or the thing to do that'll blow his mind. Because while all of that is great, and I mean, let's face it, a lot of popular culture and magazines have built empires on giving that kind of advice, there is something so much deeper. And the work that I do with women and with men across the globe is about really tapping into your sexual power and your relationship with your own sexuality as a way to tap into your personal power. So this episode is going to be directed mainly towards women, although again, as with the majority of my content, it is applicable to men as well. So let's dive in, my loves. Again, who doesn't want to have like this amazing sex life where you feel satisfied and desired and deeply connected to your partner, or fully confident, unencumbered, right? This idea of like the wild woman in the bedroom. And for so many women, orgasm, pleasure, connection to your body is something that you don't experience on a regular basis. And obviously, I am not a doctor, and there may in fact be things at play in your body, whether it's hormonal or anatomically, that might be contributing to you not having the sex life that you desire. So as always, I encourage you to seek out medical advice, a medical opinion, if that is something that feels right and true for you, knowing that the content in this show is not medical advice, but it is grounded in my experience, my certifications in sexuality and trauma work, and what I've seen with the women that I have worked with across the world and the women that I am connected to and friends with across the world. So when it comes to a woman having this amazing sex life, we have been told and taught that so much of it comes from the outside, as in what we're doing or giving to the partner, right? And the reality is, this is an inside job. It starts with your connection to yourself. So there are 3 areas that I really see women struggling with or having issues in, which lead them to an unsatisfying sex life. So the first area is your connection to yourself, more importantly, your connection to pussy. Now, if you've listened to my first episode, then you know that I believe a woman's connection to pussy is her connection to her truth and her power. So you could probably interchange the word pussy for something else. I use the word pussy because to me it is all encompassing for all parts of the female anatomy, and to me it has a deeper layer of connection to truth, connection to power, right? Now, a lot of women don't have a word that they use or are insecure or feel awkward about using a word or label to describe their anatomy or their genitals, right? And this is such a huge indication of how we as women are disempowered around our sexuality, right? So if we as a collective gender do not have a word that we use to label an anatomical part of our body, how are we supposed to feel a connection to it, right? Like if we would take your arm, for example, if you didn't have a word for your arm or you would just call it that thing, right? There would be this weird dynamic between you and your arm, right? Which is a natural and normal part of your body. But a lot of women either don't have a word, use, I don't know, down there, or use some kind of like cutesy like kitty or vajayjay or whatever. And all of it stems from a disconnection from self, right? And a lot of women use the word vagina, and vagina anatomically is actually not correct. Vagina is just the anatomical part of your body between the opening of your vaginal canal and your cervix, right? That doesn't include your vulva, so your inner and outer labia, your clitoris. It doesn't include your cervix. And so there can be this sense of disconnection from one's self, right? So without having that deep-rooted connection to yourself, it's near impossible to have a satisfying sex life. So that leads us into reason number 2 that a lot of women aren't having the sex lives that they desire, and that's from conditioning. Cultural, social, and religious conditioning. So we as women have been systematically, through the patriarchy, through religion, shamed out of our sexuality, shamed away from fully owning this sexual essence of who we are. You can see this obviously in big things like slut shaming and rape culture. It's present and prevalent in the entire concept of the Madonna whore paradigm. So as women, you have 2 options. Either you're good and virginal, or you're a whore and bad, and there's no in between. Then you have social and religious conditioning around, again, what it means to be a good woman. And typically that is more demure or surrendered or innocent. So there's no room for a woman to be passionate and lusty and full of desire and really unleashing this wild side of them. And so because our sexuality, our sexual essence is an innate and inherent natural part of who we are, when we cut ourselves off from it, when we're ashamed of it, when we find it wrong, when we are afraid of really exploring it or expressing it, that is not relegated just to the bedroom. That comes out in all areas of your life. You tend to not ask for what you want in any area of your life if you're not asking for what you want in the bedroom. But you can't ask for what you want in the bedroom or in any other area of your life if you don't know what you want. But because there has been so much conditioning over thousands of years that tell us it is not okay for a woman to be sexually alive, to be sexually lit up, right? Knowing her desires, in agency of her own sexuality and pleasure. And that message is in the culture at large, in religion, passed down from generation upon generation. It feels very confronting for the modern woman who wants to have this like amazing sex life and be liberated and be empowered in all of these different ways. And yet when it comes to the main source of their power, they cannot tap into it because there's all of this messaging that it's not okay, right? So we have disconnection from self physically, cultural, religious, and social conditioning. And then the third piece is trauma. And this is overt trauma and covert trauma. So overt trauma is what most people think of when they think of sexual trauma. So rape, molestation, incest, any sort of sexual violence, right? But then there is also what I call covert trauma, which is having sex when you don't want to have sex, but you do it because you think you should or you owe the other person, right? Again, the social, religious, and cultural conditioning that it's not okay for a woman to be sexually liberated and in agency of her own pleasure. Covert trauma could also be feeling really sexy and alive and going out and having someone make a comment about how you can't be taken seriously or how you're depending only on your looks, right? And chalking you down to being one-dimensional. So going back to this Madonna whore paradigm, like if you're showing up in this way and being sexy, then you must not have anything else to offer. So all of those covert traumas, they do register as trauma in your body. They put you into flight, fight, or more than likely freeze. And trauma just deepens the disconnection from your body and from yourself, from your power, and from your truth. So when it comes to overt trauma, the things that we typically identify as, we'll even say big T trauma, if you have been one of these so many women who has experienced this, I highly encourage you to seek out expert help and to continue to do this healing work. I truly believe that every single woman on the planet has trauma work to do around their sexuality from the covert messaging and covert trauma that we have received growing up in a patriarchal culture and society, and just, being a product of that, not to mention the messaging that you've gotten in your family. And one thing to remember is the messaging that you've received in your family about what it means to be a woman, or how you should dress, or your sexuality, or what it means to be promiscuous, or what it means to wear red lipstick, whatever that messaging is, really coming to a space of compassion that your parents, your grandparents, your family members were really just trying to give you those messages as a way to keep you safe. Because historically, women who have been quote unquote promiscuous, or women who have been sexually alive and really connected to their sexual power, have actually been killed, burned at the stake, outcast, divorced, left with nothing, right? So there can be this desire to want to protect women by making sure that they're safe and that they don't quote unquote fall prey. But in reality, in 2020, when I'm recording this podcast, in the Western world, you will not be burned at the stake, literally, for fully owning your own sexual power as a woman. So trauma, when we go into this state of fight, flight, or freeze, that registers in our body, in our nervous system. And until you complete that stress cycle, until you move that trauma literally out of your cells, it's going to be very challenging for you to connect to your body and to fully drop into your body. So when I begin to work with women and clients, there can be a lot that comes up at the beginning. So the work that I do with women around sexuality, I say it's about healing, embracing, and then celebrating. It's really this three-pronged process, but every single woman has healing to do around the messaging that they've received, around the internalized belief systems of what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a woman, to have desires, to be lusty, to be passionate. And one thing that I think we also really need to recognize is that when it comes to sexual education, female pleasure is left completely out of the conversation, right? This is why so many women feel like they're performing in the bedroom. This is why so many of those magazines are popular on like the 10 positions to drive him wild, because our barometer for sex, our barometer for pleasure has been male pleasure. It has not been female pleasure. It's not been the female body. And it has not been giving women permission and agency to own and explore their own pleasure. Pleasure is your birthright in all areas of your life, but especially in the bedroom. Now, because of conditioning and trauma and all around disconnection, this is what leads so many women to not being able to have an orgasm, to having a low libido, to experiencing a lot of other sexual dysfunctions like pain or dryness or any other thing, right? And again, I'm not a medical doctor, but I can tell you what I've seen with the women I've worked with across the globe, what I've seen in programs that I've participated in, is that when women begin to address the underlying emotional, mental, and trauma issues around their sensuality and their sexuality, their libido goes up. They have experienced better, longer, stronger orgasms. They feel more pleasure. They feel more desire for their partner, right? They feel more confident, alive, radiant. But because the conversation has been, and to a large degree still is, about male pleasure and still is about whether or not the man is satisfied. I remember, I believe I was watching this TED Talk, and it was a researcher, and they were polling young women, like college women, and they asked them to define what a successful sexual interaction was. And the majority of these women defined it off of whether or not their male partner had an orgasm. Not how they felt, not how much pleasure they've experienced, not anything to do with themselves, but to do with whether or not the man experienced orgasm. Right? And again, if that is what our lens is that if that is what the conversation has been, no wonder so many women feel disempowered, disconnected, and cut off from their own sexual aliveness, their own sexual power. And yeah, it can be easy to think, oh, okay, well, that, like, well, I mean, you know, my sex life is good enough, fine, or how important is this really? But it strikes to something so much deeper, because it really truly is the root of our power, right? If we go on the chakra system, it's our root chakra. Safety, security, stability, right? Our sacral chakra. It's our power there. And so when women begin to heal and look at the conditioning, the programming, the stories that are running the show, begin to embrace their own sexuality, their pleasure, by beginning to explore it, figuring out what turns them on, what turns you on, what feels good on your body, what doesn't feel good on your body, beginning to honor your yes and your no, really feeling like, do I actually want to have sex right now? Or am I a no? So many women have spent so many times, right? And have for so long disregarded their body's yes or no, that also leads to trauma and covert trauma, right? So your body, you feel like you can't trust your body, you're out of sync with your body, right? And so then sex is increasingly less satisfying, because there's this buildup of you not wanting to do it, but overriding the system and doing it anyway, right? And so one of my favorite quotes from my favorite movie, Dangerous Beauty, is, you must know pleasure to give pleasure. So yes, of course, having mind-blowing, amazing sex in a relationship or when you're dating, yeah, of course you're going to want the other person to experience pleasure, but here's the paradigm shift that we as women need to make. The masculine wants to give to the feminine. The masculine wants to see you happy. Men want to give you pleasure, but they typically don't. They're just going off of what has worked in the past. And if you don't know what brings your body pleasure, what can help you experience orgasm, what can help you connect, then there's no way that you can express that to the other person. So then what most women end up doing is they go into a more masculine energy, a more performing energy, where you're just trying to give to the other person, make sure he has a good experience, and maybe fake an orgasm so you can build up his ego, right? So it's really beginning by bringing back the connection to yourself. So really beginning to re-establish that, which takes time, because you have to rewire your brain on a subconscious level, really delete this old programming and conditioning, and actually rewire your body. So think of it as if there were wires or connections from your head to your pussy, and they've all been severed. Yeah. So it's about beginning to rebuild those through connecting to your body, through giving your body love and acceptance, right? And so that is the embracing part. And then the celebration part, the celebrating of the fullness of your sensuality and your sexuality, comes from really a disciplined practice. And what I mean by that is carving out time regularly to self-pleasure. I don't use the word masturbation because to me, that is so goal-oriented and it's very masculine, right? It's like, okay, I do this thing to achieve this outcome of orgasm and then I'm done. And it's usually very disconnected. It's from your body, from your, like, the fullness of pleasure and sensuality. So I use the verbiage self-pleasuring because while you might decide to create a self-pleasuring practice of, I don't know, 3 times a week, maybe you never actually experience an orgasm during that time, but you're so focused on how much pleasure can you allow your body to experience. And maybe you don't even touch your pussy. Maybe you're just stroking your arms or like using a feather or a piece of silk, right? And that again comes into this exploration where your connection to your own sexuality is the barometer of your ability to have an amazing sex life, right? So just like anything else in life, your connection to yourself, your relationship with inside yourself will set the new bar, the new level of how deep you can go in a partnership, right? So your ability to see yourself, to hold yourself, to accept your emotions is the level to which you will feel seen and held and have your emotions accepted in a relationship, right? So the same is true for your sexuality, right? And I truly believe that women's empowerment, like where we are right now, is women reclaiming and having agency over their pleasure and their sexuality as the deepest form of their power, right? And so just like, I don't know, 30 years ago, it was becoming more and more acceptable for women to be working out often or to get like a health coach or something like that. That is where I see sexuality work going in the next 5-10 years. I mean, I think it'll be closer to 5 with how quickly, with how connected we are with the internet and how easy it is to get information, right? And so, of course, in the work that I do with women, I do give tips and techniques and practices to experience better orgasms, or I talk about different positions to really like drive a man wild or whatever. But the sexiest thing for a man or for any partner, right, is someone who is fully in their body and fully experiencing pleasure. But you can't fake that. that comes from healing, embracing, and celebrating your sexuality, right? And so it's through that you come into this space of what I call sexually thriving in your life. So most women, especially single women, but women inside of relationships as well, are very much in a pleasure dependency dynamic with men, with dating in your relationship. And that's because you, again, are seeing this other person or this thing outside of you as your source for pleasure, as your source for orgasm, as your source for turn on, aliveness, right? But when you take that power back, when you take that connection back to yourself, it exponentially increases the connection that you have, the intimacy that you have, the mind-blowing sex that you have, right? Now, that's not saying that you need to be celibate forever and you don't need a partner. No, there's definitely a different flavor and different magic, right, that happens when you do have a partner, when you do experience incredibly amazing sex with someone else. But if you don't have a relationship to your own sexuality, you're constantly going to be searching outside of yourself for that. And that's what makes women feel crazy and overly needy. And then you're like running on this deprivation. And so then you just like sleep with anybody or everybody that comes your way because you're searching, you're like starving, and you're like trying to gorge on anything you can get your hands on. And inside of a relationship, if you don't have your own practice, like your own regular connection to yourself, to your sensuality, to your sexuality, and you're only getting it through your partner, or you see them as the source, then that builds resentment. It actually creates more distance because your partner can feel that you are coming at this from a place of deprivation and needing that person to give to you, or else you won't be okay. So really coming into a space of healing, embracing, and celebrating your sexuality is what actually heals deeper wounds of not feeling worthy, being afraid you won't be lovable, not feeling like you're enough, or worrying that you're too much. And it creates this sense of deep and profound self-love and deep and profound wholeness that most women don't experience ever in their lifetime, because of all of the conditioning and the trauma and the experiences that you've had that you have interpreted as meaning you were less than, not whole, not worthy, not deserving. And so as you begin to heal, embrace, and celebrate your sexuality as a woman, what you also need to remember is like really accepting all parts of you. So as you begin to explore your sexuality, accepting the part of you that might still feel shame, accepting the part of you that's lusty and wild, accepting the part of you that might want to have other sexual experiences, or might want to investigate or research in a way that you are terrified of. And the more you can create a sense of loving acceptance and compassion for these desires or for these parts of you, the less internal friction will happen, and the quicker it will be for you to really identify what your truth is, right? And then again, continuing to explore with yourself, in yourself, like whether that be fantasizing, or again with different flavors or textures or temperatures, whatever, right? Giving yourself permission and time to explore what brings you pleasure and continuing to deepen that relationship within yourself. And again, really what it ends up creating is this sense of sovereignty within yourself, this sense of wholeness. Right now, there's so much out there for women around like being a queen or being a badass or, getting shit done and whatever, right? There's all of these labels and archetypes and blah, 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 blah. But what is usually missing from the majority of these conversations when it comes to women's empowerment is empowering women sexually on a very deep and profound level. Again, not just feeling like, oh, I have these like 5 sexual positions that I read in a magazine are going to, quote, blow his mind and make him never want to leave me. No, those don't exist, right? It truly is about your connection to yourself. And the more loving and accepting and embracing you are of your own sexuality, the easier it is to create deep and profound intimacy within a relationship. Like, so many people are so afraid of having conversations around sex, around desires, around what's working and what's not working, because so many people have a disconnection from this part of themselves where there's shame and conditioning. And again, ladies, men have also a lot of shame and conditioning around their own sexuality, around their desires, around their bodies, right? And so remembering that this narrative that like a man is going to come in or a partner is going to come in and be like a sex god or goddess and just kind of like zap you on the head with a magic wand, and then all of a sudden you'll be this like radiant, turned on sex goddess is ridiculous. And to think that anything outside of yourself, whether it be lingerie, a position, a certain lipstick color, is going to make you feel confident and embodied and sexy, those can be tools. But if you don't have that connection within yourself already, then it's gonna fall flat, right? So to wrap up this episode, what I would encourage you to do is to begin to look at, if this is an area of your life that you do want to investigate more, you do want to deepen your connection to yourself, you do want to heal, embrace, and celebrate your own sexuality as a woman, I would really encourage you, if you want to do a much deeper work, to reach out to me. But if you just want to start to investigate this, start to look at the stories that you were told around sex, around pleasure, around desires, and then really begin to look at, is that true for me? Do I really believe that? What areas about sexuality or my own sexiness make me uncomfortable or afraid, and why? And just start to, as much as you can, being an unbiased observer to what's happening for you mentally and emotionally, and begin to look at situations or areas where you didn't listen to yourself. You overrode like your body's yes or no, right? And just start to get curious. It might bring up a lot of emotions. It might bring up a lot of sadness or anger or grief. And what I would really encourage you to do is feel that. Feel it fully. Move it through your body, because under that anger, that sadness, that grief of not allowing yourself to be the fullest expression of who you are as a woman up until this point is your power, is a deeper connection. Really, like to the degree that we can go into our darkness is the degree to which we can go into our light. And so really beginning to get curious about, what would having a thriving sex life look like for you? What would it mean for you to be so fully connected to and alive in your own sensuality and sexuality? And again, just getting curious. Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of The Magnetic Woman Show. If you've enjoyed this show, make sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave me a review. And if you want some free goodies, check out the details in the show notes. Have a great day.